It was a pleasure to be asked from day one and my old Time magazine editor, Steve Koepp, to share a conversation with one of the most important figures at one of the most important companies in our Miami and South Florida community. And Bettina, as the Chief Human Resources Officer at Carnival, the Miami region's 5th largest employer, if I'm correct on that, you are an even more important figure now than you were 3 years ago when the COVID-19 pandemic thrust you into a larger role than you perhaps thought you were up to. In fact, you've mentioned that when you became Carnival's human resources boss less than a year before the pandemic began, you felt the way a lot of us, including myself, have felt when we land a big job. You said you felt a little in over your head, a bit like an imposter, to use your word. And as I said, I think a lot of us have been there. Can you elaborate a little on why someone even as talented as you would feel that way?
Well, that's an excellent question, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and sharing a little bit of our story. And I see some of our Carnival family there. Awesome. So yeah, I came to Miami in 2019 as Carnival Cruise Line was experiencing a historic year, in fact, the best year ever. And I was brought in to basically develop a world-class HR team. And so I was excited about moving to Miami. I lived in the Washington, D.C. area for many years. My husband is from Puerto Rico, I'm from Uruguay, and we were ready for a change of scenery and better weather. And I came in and knowing that it was a big task, knowing that it was gonna be very complex, but having faith that I had done many things that I had, no previous experience, like working in baseball. I had zero knowledge of baseball. And so I thought, just pretend like you can do this and you'll be fine. And I arrived, and it became quite evident after a few weeks on the job that I was so over my head. And I felt like, I have concerns that maybe I made the wrong choice. I moved my entire family here. When you think about the cruise industry, it's just so incredibly complex because you're dealing with 6 industries into one. You have hotel and culinary and entertainment and tourism and transportation. And, and all of a sudden now I have 40,000 crew members that I need to look after. I have 3,000 employees shoreside. And, we really need to build a world-class HR organization. So I remember early on, I had just lost my dad. And I had a sit down with our CEO, and he said, you need to give yourself the time to understand the business, and you will be all right. But let me tell you, I had a lot of sleepless nights, and really considering whether, this was something that I was going to be able to do. I mean, every ship is kind of its own country with its own flag, its own laws, its own, we have 200 nations being represented. Every crew member that comes from a specific country, you got to abide by the laws and regulations. You have maritime law. It was just incredibly complex.
And so to help you sleep better at night, a pandemic arrives.
Right.
But crises have a way of showing us we are up to the task. Yours arrived in March 2020. COVID is spreading rapidly, and there are growing reports of outbreaks on cruise ships around the world, including Carnival's. Tell us what it was like inside Carnival in the early days of the pandemic.
Well, so overnight, I went from feeling inadequate, being in these meetings and they're talking about new builds and, strategy and nautical dilemmas and fuel and environmental concerns, and then COVID hits. And as many of you can remember, I don't think there was any industry as negatively impacted as the cruise industry. We carry the blame initially. And so I went from feeling totally inadequate to being invited to every conversation. I mean, I was having meetings 7 days a week, 5 times a day, all times of the day. We're trying to, the first major task was repatriation. So once we decided that we were going to pause our ships, and remember, at the beginning, we didn't know how long. Many of us thought, okay, maybe 2 weeks, maybe it's going to be a month. And then, we never would have thought that it was going to be almost 2 years. And so repatriation was our first monumental task. And dealing with governments and countries that sometimes they didn't even want their own citizens back. I mean, we had certain nationalities that stay behind for a year on our ships. And everything that means, you're not only taking care of their well-being, their mental, emotional well-being, and everything became about HR. I think that, we like to say in HR it's all about having a seat at the table. HR became the table. There wasn't a conversation that didn't involve our people. And so, it's incredible to say that during that period is when I gained my confidence and I realized, I have an important role. I have relevance with what's needed today. And what we're gonna do as an HR function is gonna be what's gonna bring us back. And at the end of the day, it's not about our beautiful ships and the beautiful destinations, is about our people. They're the best thing about Carnival. And so being the one trusted with taking care of them and making sure that we were ready not only for that 22-month period of pause, but then coming back. And we like to say that we're like the phoenix that rose from the ashes, literally.
But not only did you have to regain your confidence, you had to help thousands of employees essentially regain their lives. As you mentioned, the repatriation effort alone was titanic. But there was also, as you've mentioned to us, the task of helping employees get over things as grave as family members dying, but yet being thousands of miles away from them when that's happening. I can relate to that because I had a relative in Venezuela die during the pandemic, and my wife is sitting in Miami and had no way of getting. You had to deal with thousands of people who were going through that trauma. How did you navigate that?
I mean, it was, and I have people that been with us through all of this, and I'm thinking shoreside is the people that work here in Miami, which we were at one point almost 4,000 when you consider Carnival Cruise Line and the Carnival Corporation. And we were very conscious about taking care of our employees, and we didn't rush to make decisions. And in many, many ways, there are people that thought we should have acted sooner in terms of laying off and furlough. So we waited until June. So we kept everyone intact. We didn't impact anyone's pay or benefits until June. And nobody else did that. And then the repatriation, we continue to pay our crew members, we continue to take care of them, we arrange charter planes, and we really had to take care of their well-being. And like you mentioned, I mean, we did have a few crew members that passed. We had to take care of their families in a time where it was almost impossible to be in a hospital if you were not the person inflicted. But looking back at everything that we did, I think we always prioritized our crew and our employees, and we did everything we could to make sure that we took care of them in every possible way.
Now, as you mentioned, the cruise industry was obviously one of the hardest hit by the pandemic. Carnival suffered massive business disruption and lost revenue, and as you mentioned, there was this dilemma of having to furlough or lay off employees at that time. And for a time, you yourself lost 2/3 of your own HR team. How did all this impact what you had to do yourself to help keep the Carnival ship afloat, as it were?
Being an immigrant and being a woman, and sometimes, having worked in industries where we're not represented. Like I mentioned, I worked in baseball. I was the only woman. For many years before, I was usually the youngest. And having that grit and that resiliency and having faith in yourself, still self-doubt, which keeps you humble and honest, but realizing that we will get through this. And knowing that I was working for a company, Carnival Corporation and Carnival Cruise Line, that they were committed to doing what was best for our employees. And so even when we went through the difficult period of having to furlough and having to lay off, I started at Carnival in 2019, we had 92 people in HR. At our lowest point, we had 27. And I personally called everyone from the HR team that we had to furlough, and then we had to lay off. We had a vibrant recruiting team. Actually, Steve was part of that recruiting team. And, we had over 15 people in recruitment. We kept 2 people in recruitment because we didn't think we were gonna do a lot of recruiting. And, having to make those calls and making the promise to them that, as soon as we got back on our feet, we were gonna do everything we could to bring them back. And we were able, there was no greater feeling when we started making the calls to rehire or to bring the people that were in furlough.
But Carnival's having to borrow about $20 billion to get through this. And at the same time, as a result, you're having to engineer changes and innovations to things like compensation, benefits, confronting new regulations and protocols. What were the biggest challenges on that front for you?
So we basically have to re-engineer how we did everything. There was an impact to everything, to our operations. A lot of people don't realize that you just don't park a ship and let it be. It costs about $10 million to maintain a ship on a monthly basis. And so shipboard, trying to determine what was the minimum manning required to keep the lights on, right? So you make sure that you maintain the maintenance of the ship. Shoreside, it meant that we had to re-engineer our benefits. Every day there was a new regulation that we needed to abide by. Many of us took a hit in our compensation. And not one person really thought that wasn't the right thing to do. And one of the things that I am most proud of is that we had to lay off thousands of people. We furloughed thousands of people. We didn't have not one legal claim. That's quite remarkable because I worked in many other industries. You fire somebody, there is a likelihood that the person, files a claim. We did not have one claim. And the second thing that I'm very proud is that we didn't lose any of our HR people. Our, retention was quite remarkable. And if you think about it, from 90 to 27, but you still have to run benefits, run compensation. The employee relations issues that we had to deal with were life and death. So, and there's also an industry that is highly, highly regulated. So you gotta do a lot of things on the environmental front. You have the CDC basically dictating how we operate on our ships.
But the ship did stay afloat. And Carnival was the first cruise line to fully return to normal operations. Tell us what post-pandemic recovery looks like at Carnival today as it's returned to normal operations over the past year or so.
So I remember thinking, nothing is gonna be as bad as the pause and having to go through, all the layoffs and everything that we went through. And thinking once, the CDC allows us to resume operations, it's gonna be the greatest feeling in the world. And yes, it's gonna be a lot of work, but we're gonna be so pumped and so ready. And let me tell you, I'm not exaggerating when I said that the return was twice as hard as the pause, because now the entire industry is getting back, right? So now we're competing with every cruise line company in the world. You have visa delays. You have protocols. I mean, up until a few weeks ago, our crew members had to wear masks, and we were impacted by quarantine requirements. And so the return was incredibly fulfilling in a way that, okay, we're back, and Carnival Cruise Line being the first one to be fully back, we take a lot of pride on that. But the logistical and the real work that it took from an HR point of view as well, it was just something that I think we all need to be very proud of, those of you who were part of that. I mean, it was amazing.
The cruise line is now bigger than it was in 2019, right?
So we retired 4 of our ships, which were the Fantasy class, which are the smallest ones. Since then, we now have 2 new ships. There are the XL LNG class ships that have the liquefied gas, which is friendlier to the environment. And we're also got 2 more ships from Costa, which is our Italian brand, and we'll have 2 more. So I think we had 24 ships in 2019, and we're about to have 27. So yes.
But on a personal level, what did you learn about yourself through that experience? And at the same time, what did you learn about Carnival's employees?
You know, I think what I learned is that there's no need to panic. And sometimes, you know, we're human beings, and I do have fears, and I have doubts, self-doubts, and you know, I shared at the beginning, I really didn't think that I was going to be able to get the job done, but I learned to trust myself, to trust my instincts, to trust the people that I work with, to really rely on the team that had, you know, we're here because of the team and everyone's efforts. And also the impact that we have across the world in the communities that we visit and the communities that we have, you know, crew members from. I mean, as a Carnival Corporation, we have 200,000 crew members from all over the world. And the responsibility that brings, you know, understanding that these are people that represent families, villages, communities, and we get to have that opportunity to, you know, to be part of that. And so, you know, resiliency, grit. I'm Uruguayan. I like to think of la garra charrúa, which is like, we call this, and especially in football, which is this grit that nothing puts you down. And it's true. I think when you believe it, and it doesn't mean that it's organic and you just look at yourself in the mirror and you said, you know, I got this. No, it means that we will get through this. You know, you've been through tough times before. You have the right people. There is faith. There are people that believe in you. You're not here by coincidence. You earn your spot. You know, that type of self-belief. And even now, you know, there are times that I get crazy calls with crazy situations, and I keep on reminding myself, this is okay. Everything will be fine. We'll get through this like we gotten through everything else before.
On that note that you mentioned earlier about just the massive diversity of your workforce, looking ahead, what is Carnival doing now to position itself as a top employer for the 21st century workforce? Not only the diversity of the workforce, but the diversity of ways we now work.
So what's interesting, you know, you think with that $22 billion debt, we will be all about generating revenue, which we are, and our numbers are looking great. The demand is still as good as ever. But what's most important to us is to create a culture that is inclusive. We never abandon our DEI work and commitment. It is part of our journey. It's been embedded in everything that we do. And we have been very intentional about really setting up the standards, not just for the industry, but for any employer. And we have been rewarded. The Higher View awarded us, Forbes, top 100 employers, top female leaders. It's been a lot of recognition based on our efforts and the fact that not only we're 100% invested in our people, recognizing they're the reason of our existence, but we're also very committed to our footprint in the environment and the impact that our ships have in the world in general.
And in the area of something I think I know is on a lot of people's minds in the business community today, the issue of remote work.
So, unlike many of our competitors, we decided that we wanted to continue to allow our employees to have that flexibility, and we believe that there has to be autonomy and individuals deciding what works best. It was really hard for us to say, after everybody's been working so successfully for the last 2 years, now you have to come to the office on a regular basis. We're hoping to set up an environment in our office where people feel welcome and they want to come and they want to visit. And we recognize that we want to be more intentional about creating events. But I think that's been a distinguisher for us, and I have the recruiting guru right there, and that stood up for us and is giving us an edge in our attraction.
And could you just give us a really quick look at any new benefits and programs and initiatives Carnival has started to offer as a result of the lessons that were learned during the pandemic?
So one of the things that we were very intentional is that we never increase any of our premiums. We maintain everyone flat. We immediately extended COVID-related benefits. When Roe versus Wade came up through the Supreme Court, we ensured, being that we're in Florida, that none of our Florida employees were going to be negatively impacted. So we added travel benefits for individuals that can get benefits in other regions that otherwise they wouldn't be able to get them here. So Carnival is constantly looking at what it is that our employees need and how to better serve them, understanding our own diversity and complexity.
Finally, Bettina, going back to that issue of self-doubt that we talked about at the outset, and that so many of us experience, let's look at the present. You mentioned the new ships. One that Carnival just sent to Australia just came back, but it had COVID infections from what we're receiving. So there's a new cycle of pressure that you have to deal with. But what advice would you give to people who have doubts about their own ability to perform under that kind of pressure?
Well, I think, everything kind of came full circle. About a few months ago, we have a new CEO. One of the first people that he called was myself, talking about his vision for the future and where we needed to be and how we intended to get there. And we're having these conversations, and it didn't dawn on me that he was considering me for the global CHRO role. And until he said it straight out, and again, it's just the way I process things, and I have humility to a fault, and I think it serves me well, but sometimes, things don't happen at the rate that they should. But the fact that I have now been asked to, basically ninefold my responsibility, because now I oversee all 9 brands, it's a testament to the work that we have done in HR. And, and I think that the challenges are always going to be there. I was very disappointed to see what you just referenced. Fortunately, no one was hospitalized, and COVID these days with the vaccinations and the variants is not as hurtful as it was initially. But we're always, we have that agility, that nimbleness, and the resiliency to address any and all future issues that may come our ways.
Bettina, thanks so much. This was fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.